Welcome back to Strength Happens. March is Developmental Disability Awareness Month, and for some people, that might be just a theme you see on social media. But for families like ours, it's layered and it's personal.
It really is. It's not just awareness and theory, as we said about the previous episode we did on zebras and Rare Disease Day. But for us, this is what we live with every single day.
And when you first hear the words developmental disability, there's a quiet recalibration that happens as a parent. Not because your child changed, but because your expectations do. You start thinking about their trajectory, the milestones, independence, the future.
And sometimes you don't even realize that you're doing that. Right? I remember when Hallie was first diagnosed, I was already thinking ten years down the road, and we're like, whoa, let's focus on today. Let's get
In the
through.
moment.
Yeah, exactly. Even for our listeners, when you hear the term, though, developmental disability, sometimes those preconceived notions may come to our mind. And I think it's really important as we start this episode that we understand what the definition is behind the term. I was looking over at the Council on Developmental Disabilities, and they have a great definition for this. And it defines developmental disabilities as a severe chronic mental or physical impairment such as autism, cerebral palsy, or intellectual disability that manifests before the age of 22. And it's likely to continue indefinitely and causes substantial functional limitation in at least three areas of major life activities. Other examples can include ADHD, specific learning disability, Tourette's, or in Hallie's case, 18q deletion.
I think too, with the term, when we first were told, oh, Morgan's developmentally delayed, I think that you still going, hey, she can outgrow this. And I think that's a common misunderstood is that it doesn't go away. At least in our life, it didn't.
Well, and I think when people hear developmental disabilities, a lot of times when I've talked to people, they immediately go to intellectual disabilities. And
Hmm.
while that can be a large portion of developmental disabilities, it's not the bigger picture. And I think it's important that we keep an open mind of every family is going to be impacted in a different way when they have a child with a developmental disability. And I think you're the one who taught me this most when we did a podcast for a class I was teaching. And I was like, "So how do you term Morgan's diagnosis? Do you use intellectual disability, developmental disabilities?" And you
Hmm.
looked at me and you said, "I just call her Morgan." And for me, that was as like a PhD hat, I was like, "Oh my god, that was a sword to my heart." Like, you're so right. We sometimes get hung up on the words that we forget to look at the person, and I think that's why I like to look at the definition at the beginning of this episode, and I want people to look outside the box of what their preconceived notion is, because even I have my own preconceived notions coming into these terms, and I have a child who had a developmental disability.
Well, and I
Um
think for us, it took a long time for us to get to that point. When we did that podcast, she may have been 20, 21, maybe. So it took 20, 21 years to get to that place where if you had asked me maybe 5 years prior to that, while she was still in the education department, where we were still having the IEPs and still having those discussions of what her potential was, I think my answer probably would have been different.
Really? I just
Maybe.
your that answer lives with me.
Mm.
Like, it has educated me more than any textbook or professor ever did in any of my program. It really
And it
helped
was
me.
truly off the cuff.
It was like, I know I just put you on the spot, and we had an entire team recording us because
Yeah.
we were producing it at the
Mm.
university I worked at, and they were all in the sound booth recording it going, "Oh," like, they felt the breath leave me because it was
Mm.
such a good moment. I mean, we should probably play a clip of that somewhere
Yeah.
because,
It was an honest response, I guess, is the
yeah.
best way to describe it.
And I think that's part of raising awareness, right? Because it
Mhm.
doesn't matter if I have kids with disabilities and I do this for a living with people,
Mhm.
but I still am learning every day. And in that moment, I learned such a powerful lesson. And I think that's why this episode is so powerful for me, is because as someone who's a parent and a professional, I'm still learning. And it's so important that when we have an awareness month that truly impacts us as families, the more we can raise awareness, I feel like it opens an opportunity for these conversations, not just with
Mhm.
us, but with other people, because we are seeing a rise in ADHD and learning disabilities because we're getting better diagnostic tools. And we want to be that support and have these conversations with those families. So I'm appreciative of your suggestion for this awareness episode of developmental disabilities.
Well, absolutely.
And your journey's probably very unique in and of itself. So I'd love to hear a little bit about some of those early years or where it started with you.
I think every family's journey into this world starts differently. For us, it started when Morgan was very little. I think we started doing diagnostic tools probably around 6 to 8 months. And she didn't talk a lot, very much as a toddler, very limited language skills. And you know how it is, you try not to compare, but she was our first. So at first you try to make excuses, but then when you start to go to play groups and you see that all the other kids her age are being all chatty. So it got really hard in those moments to accept that. And that was just the very beginning of the journey. And I think when we were first told that she had developmental disabilities and global delayed, we still were really hopeful that she would outgrow that, and we didn't really have a lot of knowledge. The resources were more limited than today. She had these moments where she'd get very quiet and she would stare off and drop at a lamp or a ceiling fan. There's a song by Jimmy Buffett, that Little Miss Magic, and and there's this whole part about her staring at a ceiling fan. So my husband nicknamed her Little Miss Magic when she was little.
Oh, I didn't know that's why he didn't named her that.
Yeah, because we would do a arthritis run, walk, or something, and we have a team, we call it Little Miss Magic.
Oh, I love that. I
Mm.
love that I still learned something new after
Little
knowing you
things.
for
Yeah,
23 years.
but, for a while, the doctors thought she was getting those silent seizures,
Mhm.
so we went through testing and everything came back negative. Then we kinda just started assuming that because she wasn't speaking like other kids, that maybe she just didn't understand like
Mhm.
other kids as well. You automatically assume there's no language that
Right.
they're not understanding. We didn't mean to limit in our minds, but the fear has a quiet way of doing that.
And I think when they're young too, it's like for us, we looked at everything. Oh, she's rolling over. Oh, she's smiling. Like,
Mhm.
is that a sign that she's inside there? Like,
Yeah.
is she capable? Because Hallie was diagnosed young, and I can imagine for you too having that similar experience. Those first couple years, especially when it's our first kids, we
Yeah,
didn't
you
have
have no
anything
idea.
to compare it to. And I remember a doctor told us just throw the books away because I kept going, well, what to
Well,
expect
say
when you're
yeah.
accepting? He's like, ah, throw it away. So.
I know that, yeah. There needs to be a version of that book for families like ours.
Was there ever, like, a shift for you where you felt like you could see Morgan for who she was at that
Well,
time?
it's funny that you asked that 'cause, I remember I think she was in elementary school, and her teacher stopped me, probably a drop off or something, and said, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "Oh,
Oh,
no."
every parent knows that feeling. You're just like, "What did she do?
Oh,
Is
yeah, what did
something
she
wrong?"
do? Yeah, but, she said, "Morgan walked into class that morning and asked, 'Oh, how was your meeting?'" And the teacher said she stopped and asked her, "How did you know I had a meeting?" And Morgan's like, "I heard you talking about it with the other teacher yesterday."
That is
So,
so Morgan. That is so
but
Morgan.
that was the moment I truly realized that even though she may be quiet and doesn't talk a lot, she's paying attention to everything, every nuance. She just wasn't expressing it the way we expected. She was just absorbing.
I that's huge. That shift is huge, and I've always said with Morgan that she knows more than she lets on, and I know we used to be running buddies back in the day,
Yeah,
and I remember you were never a morning person. I
not
don't
at
know if
all.
you are
Still
anymore.
not. Still
Okay.
not.
I would get to your house super early, and you would still be getting ready, and so I'd sit out on a bench you had outside, and one morning, Morgan was up early, and she came and sat down next to me, and the sun wasn't even fully up yet, like, that kid was up early. And she
She
must have
was.
been 7, maybe 8, and she sat down next to me and she goes, "Where's Hallie?" And I was like, "Oh, she's at her Grammys this weekend." And she goes, "Is that Grammy your mom, or is that her Grammy who is Mr. John's mom?" And I looked at her and I was like, she knows that Grammy means either my mom or John's mom. And I'm like, "Morgan, there's more in there than you're letting other people know." And she just laughed that Morgan laugh and smiled, and she goes, I was like,
Yeah.
"Mhm, mhm."
She's
Like,
manipulative, yeah, mhm.
well, she's much brighter than I think a test ever comes out to be,
Yeah, yeah,
because
say that sh I think her IQ is like 52,
and there's no way.
and to
She
me, it's hard to balance that with what I know her as, in, like, her quick wit and the way that she expresses herself sometimes, and the little jabs and jokes that she'll do are not what you would expect that she'd be able to do with an IQ of that.
Yeah, and I think it's hard when we have kids with developmental disabilities, and things Morgan has experienced, for them to really get an accurate IQ, and it really reminds us that an IQ number does not define an individual. She has so much going on that she doesn't always express to strangers, but
Mhm.
once you get to know her, you know she's got a lot
Yeah.
more going on than.
Well, the developmental pediatrician we brought her to when she was 4, she probably gave me the best advice or just realization that everyone's IQ is really not indicative of their potential, because someone can have 130, 140 IQ, but they only function at 110. So, where you have someone that has a 80 IQ, but they're functioning more at 100, because it's more of their drive, their desire, and their personality that alters how they perform.
What a great perspective for someone to
Mm,
share with you early on in Morgan's upbringing so that you could kind of parent her with the highest expectations. You can always expect
yeah.
the
Well,
most
because
from.
she can't read, so that automatically puts her at a low IQ.
Yeah.
But is it because she can't read because of the vision issues we have? There's a lot of other components to that. Sometimes I wonder if she really can read in some basics, because she can read symbols and signs. She knows restaurant signs and all the TV signs on her iPad. She knows exactly what channel the voice is on and what that image looks like. She flips through the iPad. She knows
Yeah,
exactly where
she
to
has
find what
such
she wants.
precision, yeah,
Yeah.
in what she's looking
So,
for, and I think she may be able to. It's just so hard because she has her own way of communicating and it works for her,
right.
and that's
Mm,
all that matters to her, so
yeah. She doesn't find it necessary.
no, she works on her own timetable. I love
Yeah.
that kid.
Yeah.
But she certainly, I think it was great for that professional to be able to share that with you. I know
Yeah.
I've
I
shared,
appreciated it.
and I remember always looking when Hallie was first diagnosed because we were told the worst of
Mhm.
everything. Like she wouldn't live past 2, like anything they told us. So we were constantly looking at every little thing she did. What does this tell us that she's inside there? Like, is she going to give us a personality? Is she going to express that? And my mom is like, she's the same Hallie today that she was the day before she was diagnosed. So treat
Mhm.
her just like Hallie. And I think I had to let go of my own expectations and then just work for where she was, but keep challenging her to be the best Hallie she could be.
Yeah.
And
And
then
I
she
think too, when they
proceeded.
have that flat affect too, it doesn't help,
Mhm.
because it,
Yeah,
it doesn't look like they're responding to you, that there doesn't seem to be much personality when they have that flat affect.
yeah, and it can happen in so many ways. I remember we had our own exploring with Hallie that kept us on our toes, but I think that happens with all our kids in the medical community. They seem
Yeah.
to keep us on our toes in so many ways.
Well,
And
and I think too, we realize you can't equate verbal output with understanding.
absolutely.
And we just have to be more open, and that our kids will, like you said, they'll develop to the best of their abilities of who they're going to be.
And Hallie eventually, for us, eventually speech came. It came at a slower pace, but
Mhm.
she didn't talk like Neely talks, incessant talking. But when she spoke, it was like powerful words and just great thought processes and like more had a wicked sense of humor that you're
Yeah.
just like, all right. And and raising our kids with having these complexities and nuances, it didn't just affect us as parents, but it impacted the whole family, the
Right.
siblings, grandparents, even extended family.
Yeah, absolutely. Because everyone recalibrates differently.
Uh-huh.
Some people go into protection mode, some go into research mode, me,
That's me.
and some don't know what to say at all,
Yeah.
and they kind of avoid it. And siblings, they adapt in ways that are actually kind of beautiful.
Mm.
They often see the capability of their siblings long before we do.
I think That is so true, and I think siblings see so much more, like you were saying,
Mhm.
whether it be their capabilities or when they're struggling, they connect with them on a different level than
Yeah.
the parent's perspective, and it's a powerful thing to see, and I think our kids have a different level of empathy as a young
Oh,
adults now.
absolutely.
Have you seen that in how your family adapted with Little Miss Miracle?
Well, it hasn't always been easy. I feel like Steven and I realized very early on that the life we had hoped for her may not be the one that she'll get. We have come to the realization that she'll always be at home with us.
Mhm.
There wasn't just one thing that made us realize that she wouldn't be an independent adult. It just came with different observations and experiences. I think her medical diagnoses also make the situation a little bit more complex on where she would even be able to go outside of our home. And no one's going to take care of her the way we would. Some people can get their needs met in a group home. I just don't feel like she could based on her complexities.
Yeah, she has a lot going on medically, and
But I will say for her sisters and brother, they didn't just grow up with a sister. They grew up inside the medical world with her. They were
Mhm.
born after her. So that was the life that they've only ever known.
Yeah,
They've experienced the waiting rooms, infusions. That was normal. And they learned that sometimes plans will change without any warning. They learned empathy early. So I feel like it definitely is a different dynamic. And
mhm,
as they grew into adults, our conversations had to start changing also because we had to start talking more openly about what Morgan's future and what that might look like, especially as Steven and I get older.
mm. We're
Um,
not getting older, though, I don't like
I
that thought.
know.
But you have to, and that's the tough thing that we don't like to think about aging, but those are things
Yeah.
you have to have a
Well,
special needs trust, and you have to have all those things thought out.
and most families hope they never have to deal with these types of things, at least not that early. But in families like ours, we needed to do that early on and set up guardianship and make sure that we have the kids as guardians for her as well. So it's an easier transition for when something happens.
Yeah,
Because who knows if we're not available, we're at a concert and they can't get a hold of us and they're watching her. Someone has to be able to take care of her. So
right,
we need to have those things in place. But it's always been very important to us is making sure our other kids feel like they have a choice in their lives too. I never want them to feel like Morgan's a burden
right.
that they're expected to carry. We've always told them that if there ever came a time when they couldn't care for her, it'd be okay to place her somewhere in a group home that could give her the support she needs. It didn't mean they failed us or hurt Morgan. It just sometimes it's simply the best option in that moment. Because, who's to say when they get married, have families, or whatever their life holds, or something happens that they're unable to care for anyone else themselves, they don't need to have to worry about that too. And I
Mm.
want them to have a clear conscience that
You're
it's
okay
okay
with that, yeah.
and that we're not gonna hold it over their heads or be disappointed in them. I remember having this conversation I've had it with each of them, but Matthew was the one that really stood out to me, and I had said, "If they don't have place in their home, it's okay, you can go put her somewhere." He's like, "No, I will never let that happen." So oh, don't. No, no crying. No,
I'm sorry.
no crying.
I just know how much your kids love Morgan, and I just know Matthew's a fierce advocate for his
That
sister.
well, when we had just him and we knew Morgan that this was going to be something long term. That was one of the reasons why we had one more, but
Yeah,
surprise was two more. So I think in that moment, I realized something very powerful. And we may not know exactly what the future holds for Morgan, but I do know this that we've raised some incredible humans who love their sister deeply and will always, always make sure she's cared for. And what more could I ask for?
absolutely. That's That's one of the things I absolutely love is all 3 of my kids have complex medical issues and have grown up differently, but seeing the adults that they're becoming, I'm extremely proud of Neely and B and the humans that they are, because it's because of the life experience, being a
Right.
sibling to Hallie, being a individual for who they are. They grow up to be crazy, wicked, awesome humans that I'm super proud of. But
Well, and
we
I know
wouldn't
you've had moments like that with Hallie too, where you realize that maybe you've underestimated something or maybe saw her in a different light.
Absolutely. I think it was the early on times, as soon as we saw that light,
Mhm.
you never second guessed her because she was wicked. Look at me, I'm turning into a northerner. I'm saying
You are?
wicked. I'm saying wicked too much. Um, she was just so incredibly smart and feisty and opinionated and bossy, and a pain in her siblings' ass sometimes. But in the early years, I didn't know who she was, and it was almost felt like she was trapped inside her body because her speech
Mm,
was stuck and
right.
it wouldn't move. And we taught her sign language, and her hearing was had a deficit, which we didn't know how severe till many years later. But so we taught her sign language, and it got some of her frustration out when she was able to finally communicate with us. But I don't know if you know this about me, but I sometimes curse a little too much.
Mm,
Mm. So
never heard that before.
so I remember Neely was a brand new baby. We had just moved to Valrico area in Florida. Neely was like a couple weeks old. Hallie was in preschool for speech. And I remember John saying in a car ride, "You need to stop cursing. She's going to say all these words into her speech with us." I was like, "No, she's not. Are you, Hal?" And I'd look at her and she'd just smile because she didn't really
Mhm.
talk. And I had this situation where John comes out of the bathroom early in the morning. I had just fed Neely. I was putting her back in the bassinet, and he brings Hallie out holding her hand and goes, "Tell mommy what you just said." And she goes, "Fuck." And I went, and John goes, "See what you're teaching her? See what you're teaching
Mm-mm.
her? She just said that in the bathroom." And I go, "Oh, no, no, no. We're working on utensils in speech. She's saying fork, right, Hallie? Fork." And she said, first sentence out of her mouth ever in a long sentence. Like she could say a few
Yeah.
words to us, but her first long sentence was, "No, mommy, I said fuck. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Just like you." And then she goes on she goes on and says, "I can say fork, 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 fork. You say fuck, fuck, fuck."
Oh
And I was
my.
like, "Oh." I got in so much trouble on that one, but it
Well,
was
but now you have great stories.
that kid got me in so much trouble. I'm like, "You choose to do a whole paragraph now, Howie?" And she just laughed and, it
She's like, "I got mom in trouble."
yes, exactly. And it made me realize that kid has it going on. I finally was like, she's showing her it wasn't just that she could speak, but she was showing her little personality coming out.
Right.
She was just 3 years old, and she picked up on everything we said and
Mhm.
did, her little hands on her hips, and I have my hands on my hips. And I go, "Why are you standing with your hands on her hips?" And we looked at each other and started laughing.
Little mimics.
She was a one little smart cookie, but she was just someone who chose her words selectively, and she
Mhm.
spoke on her terms only when she had something she wanted to share. And sometimes those words didn't come fast enough, and we would deal with aggression with her siblings or pulling someone's hair or things like that when she was little, but
Mm,
as she got older, she learned I go at a slower pace, and that's okay with
mhm.
me. When my brain's going a mile a minute, she'd be like,
Right.
"Chill out. Let me have time to process," and it was
I
powerful.
love that. It's those moments that remind us that growth doesn't always look the way we expect it to. With a little humor.
100%,
Mm,
100% with a little humor, and it's always on their terms. I mean, I think that's true of any kids. Life
yeah.
happens on their terms, but I think with kids who are a little more medically complex and have developmental disabilities, they teach us something so different in how we approach life that it's a growth opportunity for us as humans. So and this is
Yeah.
why awareness matters because so much of our society operates on the assumption
Mhm.
that developmental disability means being less of a human as opposed to having so much to offer the world. It's just, it looks a little different, and that's okay.
Yeah. Well, and I think visible disabilities versus invisible disabilities, the ones you see and then the ones you don't. There's a tendency to put everyone in a little box based on what you see and you don't see.
Absolutely. Even for me as a parent, I put Hallie into that little box. In the early years when she was
Mhm.
just a few months old, I remember when she was 6 months old, John had asked me, it was like right around Christmas time, and she would ask, "When is she gonna sit up?" Because we were doing
Mhm.
all this physical therapy. And I said, "Oh, John, you need to be patient." Here I at the time I had a degree in child development and education. I was like, "Oh, babe, let me teach you." And I was like, "She has low tone similar to Down syndrome, and things are just gonna happen a little later. You need to be patient." And his response was, "If you're her mom and you don't set expectations high, who will?" And that
Mm.
woke me up right then and there. And you know what freaking milestone she hit? The only milestone she hit on time was sitting up. She sat up by 5.5, 6
Really?
months. Yeah.
Huh.
Just to prove her mother wrong.
Yeah.
It was Christmas morning, and she had these choking spells, even
Mhm.
after she had had her stomach tied off and had a feeding tube, and I remember our pediatrician at the time in Nashville had said, "Look, I'm doing Christmas Eve with my family, our big celebration. I'm on call from midnight on. Call it anytime. I'll meet you at the doctor's office. I
Mhm.
don't want you in the hospital on Christmas." And she had a huge choking spell that morning at, like, 4:35 in the morning, and we took her out, we vented her tube, we're cleaning her up, suctioning
Mhm.
her, and I'm holding her on the bed like this, and
Yeah.
she's facing John, and I talk with my hands, and I was always talking with my hands. He goes, "If you're talking with your hands, who's holding the baby?" And there she was balancing herself up on a bed, an uneven surface, no
Yeah.
doubt, and the first time she sat up was Christmas morning, and John's like, "See? You gotta set those expectations high." And I was like, "Oh, lesson learned." So I guess
Uh,
our family and our kids keep us in line on those
I
expectations.
think these moments help us as parents to not set limits on them and continually remind us that a diagnosis is just information. It does not define their destiny.
Absolutely. And I think right now, when we're seeing some of the healthcare benefits being reduced
Mhm.
or SSDI being reduced and programs being scaled back, and even DEI initiatives being pulled away in different spaces, our families are the ones that feel that first. And
Mhm.
I think that's why mindset can matter so much.
Yeah.
And because while we can't control every system overnight, we can control whether we how we handle our own child in our own home. And again,
Mhm.
this brings us back to awareness.
Yeah, Morgan has adult care, and they didn't eliminate a lot, but we're starting to see every day
Feel
they
that.
had to cut back a half an hour, and it's just because the way that they're being paid out to make sure that their employees are getting taken care of. So, yeah, it's a direct reflection of what's going on today.
It's a tough one, and I see that in so many with what services are available on all levels. So,
Yeah.
important
Well,
conversations that we can have with each other.
yeah, and as I reflect back about the early years, I think the hardest part wasn't just the diagnoses or the endless questions. I think it was a feeling that I didn't have any control over the path that we were gonna have to travel.
Mhm.
And as parents, we want a clear roadmap. Like you said, we had the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting, What to Expect the First Year, and they didn't follow that path at all. We didn't have that clear roadmap. We wanted to know where they were going, but how to get them help to get there. Um,
Absolutely.
but I think Morgan taught me something different, that she was always going to develop at her own pace, in her own way. She doesn't need to meet anyone else's expectations to live a meaningful life. She
Mm.
just needs the space to be exactly who she is and to grow in the time that's right for her. And I knew at that point that my role wasn't trying to change her or hurry her along, but to walk beside her, trust that the journey would unfold exactly as it was meant to.
I think you said a powerful statement. She didn't need to meet anyone else's expectations
Mm,
to live a meaningful life. And I think I always looked at what other people thought in those early years of
mhm,
because I worried so much. And I think I got to that point too, that they needed to just be the human that they were meant to be. But that's a hard one, especially when you're a new mom. I think if I were to go back into some of those earlier years, especially with Hallie,
mhm.
I think I would remind myself to enjoy the little moments. because I
Uh,
often kept looking forward to the future about how is she gonna have a job? Where is she gonna be
mhm.
able to go to college? And she never got those opportunities, you know? And
Yeah.
I I think I would tell myself, "Stay present, celebrate the simple victories, enjoy your child for who they are, and keep asking, 'Why not them?' You know, why can't they have this and be this and do that?" And just enjoy every moment. It took me a while, but eventually I got to that point and I was able to sit in the moment and really enjoy
I do
how.
love that. I love that perspective because I think it's so easy to get trapped and sucked into everything that's going on in that spiral of trying to find information to make things better for them, or you're constantly on that alert instead of just focusing on what's in front of you.
Absolutely,
But,
absolutely.
and I know we're not the only families who've had moments like that. So,
And that's truly why we are doing this episode because it's Developmental
it is.
Disability Awareness Month. And we wanted to start this series talking with other people about these different diagnoses and how we can raise awareness so that we have a way to create a more inclusive society for all individuals living life a little differently than maybe you or I are. So, over the next few episodes, we're going to talking with families who've taken those struggles, those little, I think you call them recalibration moments, and turn them into action. So I'm kind of excited.
Yeah, I am too. I think because disability does not determine outcome, and potential doesn't always unfold on the timeline we expect. So I think it'll be kind of exciting for our listeners to get a different perspective of what other families have done.
Yeah. It really unfolds on its own in its own way. And I think living in the disability community, you and I have met so many amazing families and the lives they've changed based on the work they're doing because of who their children are. So I'm really looking forward to talking to some of those families.
Yeah. And since it's Developmental Disability Awareness Month, we hope this conversation helped open the door to thinking about disability a little bit differently,
And if it did, maybe you'd like to share this episode or start a conversation with someone in your own life.
because awareness really starts with understanding.
And with listening to people's stories.
And thanks for being here with us today. This is Strength Happens.
Thanks for listening to our stories.